Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about middleware in Express, and we will also try to understand why do we use middleware and how you can look like a more skilled engineer if you use middleware in your own code. So I will try to keep this video as short as possible because I don't want to overcomplicate this video, and also this topic sounds a bit complicated at the first glance, but if we try to break this topic into smaller part and try to understand middleware step by step, then this topic of middleware is a piece of cake. So please stick around till the end of this video to understand all the key terms related to middleware. So before going ahead with middleware, I hope that you have watched my two videos on backend web development overview with NodeJS and also master ExpressJs by creating backend routes for Flipkart website. I will also add link of these two videos in the description or in the comment section. So if you have watched these two videos, it would be helpful for you, and if you have already watched it, then it's great. So let's start and go ahead with what are middlewares. So now let's take a scenario where you as a user needs to access your valuable information through a GET API route app.get/valuableinfo without using any middlewares. But you need to authenticate your credentials before you can access your valuable information on the server. So as you can see, there is no middleware, then there would be only two components in the picture. First would be client, where you would be initiating your request, and another would be server, where your request would be consumed. So this would be the request from the client, and from server we would receive a response in return. Okay, so there were in total two requirements. The first requirement was to fetch your valuable information which was present on the server, and secondly, you need to authenticate your credentials before you can access your valuable information. So whatever authentication logic that you are going to write would be written on the server and server itself, because there is no middleware or any third component present in the picture. So the only one place where you can write your authentication logic would be present on the server. So this would be the case when there is no middleware present. In this case, the authentication logic would be present on the server. So now let's find out what would happen if we introduce middleware in this case. So as you can see over here that I have kept middleware in between my client and my server. My middleware is present between my request and response pipeline. So let's keep this topic as simple as possible, the topic of middleware. So what would happen over here? I have an extra component where I can write my authentication logic before I hit my APIs, before I hit my server. Okay, so whenever I create any request from my client to fetch any user related information, my authentication logic would be present in the middle of client server architecture. As a middleman, my middleware would act as a middleman, and my middleware would authenticate my request or my user credential whether I am eligible to access the information from the server or not, and only if I am eligible to access the information I would hit my APIs. So middleware would act as a middleman or an agent in between my client and server. And suppose there is a scenario that my credentials or my username and password does not match, or they are invalid. So in this case I am ineligible to access the valuable information present on the server. So in this case, simply the response would be written by my middleware rather than my server. So what would happen in such case? So as you can see, the request would be created from the client, and if the user credentials are not valid, the middleware will process it and return the response itself. The request would not even reach to my server. So now let's try to code these two scenarios using Express, and also try to write your own custom middlewares using Express, and how just simply introducing this small component of middleware in between client and server, how you can overcome different complications and make your code more scalable. So now let us try to code a GET API to fetch our valuable information which is present on the server. Before we are able to fetch the information from the server, there are two checks that we need to fulfill. The first check is that the user who is trying to access the valuable information should be authenticated with help of username and password. The second check is that the user should also be the citizen of the country. Once these both checks are completed, only after that the user would be able to access all the information which is present on the server. So firstly, we will try to achieve this requirement without using any middlewares. So over here you can see I have created a get route. to access our valuable information over here, and I am fetching three parameters from the request. The first two parameters, the username and password, is been fetched from request.headers. I am going to pass it from the postman. I will show you later. And then whether the user is citizen or not, I am going to pass it from the query params. Okay, so over here there is a if condition. The first check, the first requirement was to check whether the username or password is valid or not. If valid, then we can move ahead and fetch the information, and if not, then it will send a response showing that the username or password is incorrect. Okay, then the second check, that the user must be the citizen of the country. If yes, then you are able to access the valuable information. If not, then you are not the citizen, and the response would be 400 error. Okay, so let's try to run this program, and with help of postman I will send the request. Over here you can see in headers I have set username as Aditya and password as pass-a, and in params section I have set is citizen as 1. Okay, I will send this. So as you can see, all the pre-checks were completed successfully, hence you are authenticated successfully, and hence you are able to access your valuable information. I am showing a response of 200 OK with this success message. Okay, let's try to change the request now. I am sending is citizen as 0 from params and try to send it. Now you can see you are not a citizen. Okay, I hope this piece of code is clear to you guys. So now let's introduce another route, a route to update our valuable information present on the server. Firstly, we were just trying to fetch the valuable information present on the server, whether the user is authenticated or not. On basis of it, we were able to fetch it. Okay, but now we are introducing another route to update the valuable information. So even in this case, we would be authenticating our user with help of username and password, and also we would be checking that whether the user is citizen of the country or not. So I just need to repeat this code which I have already written in the get route. I just need to repeat this code in my put route. Okay, no problem over here. So as in this case, I had only two routes. So I just needed to repeat my pre-checks, the code of my pre-checks only twice. No issues over here. But let's imagine a case I need to create hundreds of routes with the same pre-checks of authenticating my user and also checking whether my user is a citizen of the country or not. So in this case, I need to write this block of code in each and every routes hundreds of times. I need to repeat myself hundreds of times. So this is against dry principles. What are dry principles? Don't repeat yourself. So how can we overcome this issue? We can simply overcome this issue by introducing middleware, and let's try to code our own custom middlewares in Express. So over here I have written the same logic but with help of middleware. So as you can see, I have created two methods. Check credentials middleware. What it does, it simply checks the username and password, and there is also another middleware as well. The name of the function is check citizenship middleware, which checks whether whether the user is citizen of the country or not. Okay, uh, so what it does is that it fetches the username and password from request.headers. Then if the username and password does not matches, it sends a response as error. If not, then it is calling the next method. What is this next function? We will see this in the later part of the video, but just keep this in mind, and let's move on. What is the next part of the code? Yeah, so this is app.use check credentials middleware and app.use check citizenship middleware. So what is this app.use? So app.use simply says or notifies our Express app that these two functions are going to act as a middleware, and please mount this on our request response pipeline. So what I mean by this is that the request will not directly hit our backend APIs. Whatever backend APIs that we are going to write, get, post, put, will not get hit directly. Instead, the request would come first to our middlewares. The middleware would process the request, and depending upon the logic written in it, suppose in our case, the check credentials middleware will check whether the username or the password of the user is correct or not. If it is correct, only then it will hit our backend APIs. So now once you have mounted your custom middlewares using app.use, you can simply mention them in your API routes or your backend routes over here. As you can see, if there are multiple middlewares that you are going to use for your backend APIs, then simply write it over here with help of comma, separated by comma. As you can see, I was using two middlewares, one to check the credentials and one to check the citizenship. So I have written it over here, separated by comma. Only one thing that you need to keep in mind is that you need to mention these middlewares before mentioning your actual logic of your backend APIs. So over here, the main logic was to access the valuable information. Suppose you are accessing the valuable information from the database. So you need to mention the middlewares that you are going to use before your actual logic of your backend API. This will let your backend API know that before executing your actual logic, these two middleware should be get executed successfully and the next function should be called. So what is this next function? So next function simply calls the next middleware in the request response pipeline. So over here you can see the first middleware which we are going to use is that check credentials middleware. Check credentials middleware simply checks the username or password of your user. So if the username and password of your user is valid, it is simply calling the next function. So the next function will call the next middleware in the line. So what is the next middleware in the queue? So the next middleware is check citizenship middleware. So the check citizenship middleware checks whether the user is citizen or not. If yes, then it is again calling next. So now what is the next middleware? But as you can see, there is no next middleware. There were only two middlewares and both the middlewares has been executed successfully. So now in this case, the next will simply call the actual logic written inside our backend API, which was to fetch the valuable information. So this is the role of next function. And there is a quite high chance that you have already used middlewares in your existing Express code. Like for example, app.use express.json. So this is a built-in middleware provided to us by Express. And what it does is that automatic parses JSON data from request.body. So now let's summarize what we have studied so far. On the left, you can see I have written a code where I am not using any kind of middleware. Hence, I am writing the authentication logic in my backend API itself. And I am writing the same piece of code again and again in my get API and put API. So suppose if there are hundreds of routes, then I need to repeat this authentication logic again and again in each and every backend API hundreds of time. And suppose there is any change in the authentication logic, then I need to update the code logic hundreds of time in each and every backend APIs. Okay, so how we can overcome this? By using middlewares. So on the right side, you can see I have converted this logic of authentication and authenticating my citizenship into these two methods, check credential middleware and check citizenship middleware. And then using app.use, I am mounting these two middlewares in my request response pipeline. And then finally, I can call these middlewares in my routes or in my get routes or in my post routes multiple times, as many times I want. And suppose if there is any change in the logic of authentication, then I just need to change it once over here in the function body itself, and I don't need to change it again and again in my backend routes or in my backend APIs. So I hope you found this video interesting, helpful, and you learned something new. And I hope the concept of middleware is a bit simpler now to understand. And you can also create your own custom middlewares and implement this in your own code of Express. And thanks for watching this video. In the next video, we are going to learn about global caches and Zod. So stay tuned and see you soon, guys.